I guess just the only reason why I kind of chose Vibe was kind of like just how easy it was and also like the customer service. I've worked with the trade desk before
Mhm.
handling a lot of high volumes, and it was just like, well, if you don't meet, let's just say, a certain number out there, then we can't work with you.
Melvin Vigo, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. You work with, or you're the founder and owner of MRose Digital, a marketing agency in Florida. And you have been working with Vibe for a few months now. So before we get into all the details of the types of campaigns you've been running, where, how, what, tell us a little bit more about your agency, some of the challenges you faced, and what brought you to CTV and Vibe, just more generally.
Yeah, so I mean, MRose Digital kind of was born based on the need of the market. I've been in the media and TV and radio industry for little over 10 years at this point. Kind of just seeing how, traditional media was evolving and where it was headed. I was fortunate enough to work for big corporations, which I'm not going to name them right now, but I was their digital program director for several different companies. So kind of got to develop their digital strategies and everything like that. And then my last adventure in the corporate world before I kind of went full time with my own agency, I actually got to develop an entire OTT platform that we got to launch for the news station. And that's kind of how I learned, the ins and outs of, ad placements and things like that. It was kind of a no brainer for me, I guess, at that point, because it's just kind of like, okay, well, if people are traditionally already accustomed to this product, not the digital side of things, but placing regular traditional TV commercials, and now there's actually clarity of knowing, like, okay, well, this person converted at this time and they visited my page views and things like that. I guess just the reporting aspect was just kind of turnkey, and I kind of just ran with it. And after talking to a lot of people, it's like there's a need for it in the market, and people just seem to be very responsive when you're talking to them. So
Okay, that's great to know. So you were, because we still talk to a lot of people who are like, I'm still finding out about CTV and what it all entails and how frequency capping works and targeting and all that. So you knew what you were talking about. Um,
so yes and no. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you.
no, 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 yeah.
Like, like Juliana has been very great and like teaching me and guiding me on like how to um present it, of course, because like I'm very aware of, like, I guess phase one, if you want to call it for that. It's like I know the terminology and what it does, but you know, ever since I've left my corporate world, I mean my corporate job, it's only been 7 months, and within those 7 months, there's been a lot of development that I never really got to touch when I was back, doing those apps and placing those media buys and everything. So with anything in this industry, it's always constantly changing. So I'm always having to adapt.
Yeah. So Juliana, just for anyone who's watching, is your account manager. She's helping you figure out how best to make your campaigns work and optimize them. I'm curious just to take a tiny step back. So you knew about CTV, you knew it was something you were going to work with. What made you choose Vibe in the first place?
I guess just the only reason why I kind of chose Vibe was kind of like just how easy it was, and also like the customer service. I've worked with the trade desk before
Mhm.
handling a lot of high volumes, and it was just like, well, if you don't meet, let's just say, a certain number out there, then we can't work with you. Like, that's not reality when it comes to a lot of businesses. Like, not everybody can afford $1 million budget every single year for advertising. So it's more about the turnkey and accessibility that the platform provides. And also too, like, I was using Ground Truth, which definitely another competitor, but after I believe about a year or so using their platform, it's just like, oh, well, here's a new account executive, and then a couple weeks later, oh, I'm introducing you to this person, and you're now moved on to that. It's like it's not really consistent. And on top of that, it was just like, okay, well, I have an issue of why am I showing these amount of impressions, but I'm being charged this much. oh, well, we don't count bots and things like that. Like it's not very transparent. So
Okay.
I kind of just decided to move on and um, go somewhere else. I've developed a very close relationship with Juliana. I feel like I talk to her on a daily basis. And it's just been very like, okay, well, you know, if I don't understand this, here's the explanation, here's the educational background. She's been very helpful as well of just like mapping out like what is the growth of not only just the vision that we're looking at, but also from like a business standpoint because we're working closely together to help each other. I guess overall just ease of the platform and transparency and just always having somebody there that can answer questions.
That's wonderful to hear, and Juliana is definitely a gem. You're lucky to have her. I will say too, it's like, yeah, CTV's been around for a few years now, but really didn't take off until COVID, if we're being honest. And even today, there are new features every single day. There are mergers. One app was called one thing one day and a different thing another day. There's integrations going live constantly. So of course you're going to need to have your handheld at least a little bit at the beginning. I'm curious. So I know that since you're a digital agency, you're not necessarily going in with one or two campaigns that you're focused on. You're working on a lot of different types of projects. But could you give me an example of some of the KPIs you were excited to look for at the beginning of the campaign? They might have changed eventually, but like, were you looking at ROAS? Were you looking at web traffic? Were you looking at reach? Like, what were the things that got you excited about having a CTV campaign?
I guess just understanding of one, where's our dollars actually going to, and not just like, hey, you spent $5,000 and you don't know where it's going to.
Mm, mm.
Just the transparency of reporting was definitely the main key for me. And actually understanding it's like, okay, well, if there's a certain amount of impressions or sessions that have already been converted, what was the actual average acquisition to get that client to convert? It's helpful as an agency to understand those numbers and kind of help guide the process. I want to know exactly down to the dollar as like how things were spent, versus before it just felt like here's the money and there's no transparency whatsoever.
Yeah, and that really is the old school TV model, right? It's like, well, it ran at some point, and hopefully you'll see a bump that we assume is related to that airing, but there's no proof. Um, so I looked around, I poked around a little bit, and I noticed, I'm not going to say their names, but there was a university you were working with that seemed to have really cool results, and then a music festival. And I saw it was like cost per lead, cost per session, web traffic, that kind of stuff seemed to be what you were focused on. I wonder, were there optimizations that stood out to you? Like, we started like this, and then after fiddling around with it for a week or two, we realized XYZ helped. Anything like that you could share?
These are the goals up front and actually optimizing it on a weekly basis. When it comes to a festival, of course, it's all about, well, what's the investment, what's the return out of those tickets. So it's very beneficial to understand, like, how many tickets actually came from, these OTT ads and kind of understanding like what that conversion rate was and
Mhm.
if it's actually a good investment. But also, too, for the university's perspective, if it's just like, they wanted to know where that budget was going to, but also like what sort of conversions that led to. So at the end of the day, it still was very focused on the conversions because that's just what people want at the end of the day. Um, so I mean, both clients were extremely happy. We're actually looking at we're talking about annuals at this point.
That's fantastic to hear. And I mean, tell me if I'm over overstating it, but I wonder, would you say that the fact your agency is able to offer CTV gives you more of an opportunity to expand your reach and your client retention than if you were not able to offer CTV?
Yeah, for my particular reason, definitely has been very beneficial. So for someone as a promoter, for example, to be able to come to me and say, hey, I have XYZ, festival. I want you to handle all of my ticketing. I want you to handle all of my, just marketing in general. It's like it's very turnkey. And I've actually already pretty much scaled down into the niche. I'm only going to be offering basically the ticketing service, but also just strictly OTT offerings, just because the demand is extremely high. So I'm basically been in talks with Juliana, which I keep saying her name, but she's super great. And we're actually like talking about which verticals can we expand and niche down to.
Okay.
Because yes, we are in the media space, but at the end of the day, it's like how does one support the other? For example, Eventbrite, yes, they kind of offer very similar services, but Eventbrite can't be custom tailored to the client. They can't sit here and design graphics. They can't sit here and design TV commercials and things like that.
That is so exciting to hear that you're like starting off hot and you're getting some great initial results and you're using that momentum to figure out, what the next step might look like. You mentioned creatives. That's always something I'm curious to hear about. Again, you're not new to the idea of streaming TV, but a lot of folks were often like, do I need to spend $1 million? It's going to be on TV. What does making a TV ad even mean nowadays? Could you tell me a little bit about that process for you? How do you approach it? Do you do any creative testing? Are there any best practices you have? Anything around creative specifically for streaming TV?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really goes back to optimizing for each creative. For example, um, for the university that we were just talking about, pretty much we did multiple campaigns within that entire frame. It was within the 30-day frame. Those campaigns, one was for conversion, the other one was for brand awareness, and just really dialing into making sure that the creative was relatable to the audience. So, for example, this university was running in 3 different markets. Each one of the creatives was completely tailored to their entire, demographic. So, if you're in Miami, of course, you're going to look at, beautiful beaches and palm trees and things like that, and kind of tailor that experience of that lifestyle of Miami. But if you're in Orlando, you're not going to get that. You're going to get a completely different experience. So it's still the same message across, but you're really tailoring into that specific person and making it relatable.
Okay, and then you kind of mentioned this, but I just want to come back around since we've talked about your goals, some of your optimization, your creative process. Were there any results that really stood out for you that you were like, okay, this is how I know this was a successful campaign for me, for my client. This is what success means to me, and did you reach it?
I guess from the university standpoint, we saw pushing almost 200 leads, which is basically almost doubled from any other vendor that they've ever used. That's kind of point one. The leads were basically considered someone who actually saw the ad, and then whether it was within the hour or whatever it was, since we're able to identify based on the IP address, they actually filled out the form and they actually submitted the information. So at the end of the day, we're still able to identify that, hey, this TV commercial was the last thing they saw before they actually converted.
That's incredibly cool to hear, and I'm sure very reassuring to your clients as well.
Yeah, and then also too is like on the other hand, when it comes to the concert that we were talking about, we went from very little ticket sales to basically uh, doubling the ticket sales. So there was a very good turnout, and we definitely saw the increase as soon as we started to turn on that campaign. Of course, within the first 24 hours, it's always learning the algorithm and things like that. But definitely, that conversation is now being extended into like how can we move forward with our agency to continue doing shows throughout the state of Florida and potentially even looking at other markets as well.
That is fantastic. I usually wrap up this kind of conversation by asking what's next, but it sounds like what's next is longer contracts, more verticals, more clients, more calls with Juliana. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I let you go for the day?
I guess the only thing is like, don't be afraid to jump into something because you don't really fully understand it. Vibe has been super great to me, and only we've been working for a couple months, but just really understanding that at least there's someone there that I can always have to bounce ideas back of or try to figure out a strategy. Like at least, you don't get that from a lot of people. And I always, praise Juliana and Jonathan, always thinking them because it's not an everyday thing that you find that.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely pass that along. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye bye.